Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and today, Mirz Hashem, we will be completing Daf Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, as well as learning Daf Pei Aleph Amud Beis, at least the bulk of Pei Aleph Amud Beis, I hope. Before we begin our learning today, our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Ariel Yosef ben Miriam Rezel and for Meir ben Chayes Sarah. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanasunim Batzaru Bashivya, Ha'imdim bein bayam u'bein bayabasha ha'makayim Yerachem aleihem ve'yitzim mitzar l'rvacha me'afelu la'ira u'mishibud l'geula hashta bagala u'vizman kariv v'neimar amen. So we pick up today on Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, Siman Kuf Ayin Ches Sif Beis, 3 lines off of the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch on Pei Aleph Amud Aleph. Now, so far, here in Siman Kuf Ayin Ches, we've seen the beautiful Hakdama of the Chavetz Chaim to the topic of Shinui Makayim and how it affects both Bracha Rishona and Bracha Achrona. And we have seen Sif Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch, where we have seen, for the most part, the Shita of the Mechaber, of what constitutes a Shinui Makayim and how it really affects Bracha Rishona and Bracha Achrona. The Mechaber gave us over here in Sif Aleph really ultimately 2 cases. He gave us one case where somebody left his house and went to somebody else's house in middle of a Suda, but a Suda where he was Keveya Suuda al Hapas. So the Mechaber clearly so far has been discussing a case where somebody washed until his Yadayim, he made Hamoitzi on Lechem, on Pas, he's in middle of the Suda, and then either he left his house and went to somebody else's house, or the second case of the Mechaber was where somebody came and knocked on the door, wanted to speak to him. He got up from his table, he walked out the front door of his house, and he spoke to somebody outside the house. In both of these cases, said the Mechaber, this constitutes a bona fide Shinui Makayim. And in the eyes of the Mechaber, once you make a Shinui Makayim, even if we're dealing with a case where you made Hamoitzi, so you ate something that is tzarich bracha achrona b'mekaymai, you need to come back for Birkas Hamazon. So you might think that the requirement that you come back to your original place for Birkas Hamazon should serve as an anchor that anchors the person to Mekaymai Rishon, and maybe it should not constitute a Shinui Makayim. That is not the Shitas HaMechaber. The Mechaber paskins like the Mechaber paskins like the Rambam. The Rambam paskins like Rav Sheshes, and therefore the Mechaber paskins that even when you make Hamoitzi, if you make a bona fide Shinui Makayim, then as soon as you made the Shinui Makayim, you terminated your original Suda. You ended your original Suda. And since you ended your original Suda, really, you should bench before you make the Shinui Makayim. If you know you're going to go outside to talk to this fellow who wants to speak to you outside the house, you should say 1 minute, you should bench, and then go outside. If you're going to your chaver's house, really you should bench, and then go to your chaver's house. B'di'evid, if you walked out the front door without benching, so then when you come back, the first thing you need to do is bench al lemafreya. You need to bench on what you ate up until now. You ended your Suda when you walked out. You come back down. The first thing you have to do is bench. Then you want to continue your Suda. You need a new Bracha Rishona. You need a new Hamoitzi. And that's how the Mechaber paskind over here in Kof Ayin Ches Sif Aleph. Now, the Mechaber also mentioned that a Shinui Makayim mipina lepina. If you go from one end of the room to the other end of the room, a pina is a corner. So the Mechaber said, if you're inside the house, if your chaver came in to talk to you, you got up from the dining room table and you walked 20 feet to the other end of the room and you spoke to him over there, the Mechaber said that in one cheder, in one room, going from one end of the room to another end of the room does not constitute a Shinui Makayim, so that would not affect neither the Bracha Achrona nor the Bracha Rishona. The Mishnah Berurah, nice cotton test, pointed out to us, that's true, even if when you go to the new place, you can no longer see your original spot at the table. maybe there's a Svarm Shrank blocking the way, maybe there's something else blocking the way, but even though it's Eina Raya Mekaymin Harishain, even though you can't see the original place, Mipina Lapina in Cheder Echad, from one end of the room to the other end of the room, in the same room, the Mechaber said, is not a Shinu Makom. Then the Ramah in Sif Aleph chimed in, and he spoke about the case of going Mecheder Lecheder Bebayis Echad. Let's say you go in one house, you go from the dining room to the kitchen or to the living room or to the second floor to a bedroom. So in that case, the Ramah said, that is a Shinei Makom, but with a very, very big difference. The difference is that by the Shinei Makom Mecheder Lecheder Bebayis Echad, Das would help. In other words, says the Ramah, if when you first started the meal, when you first made the Hamoitzi, you had Das that during the meal, you're going to go upstairs to check on the baby, or you're going to go downstairs to the basement to get something from the pantry, or you're going to go and sit down for a few minutes with your wife in the living room, and then come back to the dining room. Said the Ramah, Mecheder Lecheder Bebayis Echad, even though that could be a Shinu Makom, but if you had Das that you were going to do it, then it's not a Shinu Makom, and it will not affect Bracha Rishona nor Bracha Achrona. We brought down from the Haitika Paiskim that they say nowadays the default is that people have Das to go from one room to another room. Therefore, we do not see Mecheder Lecheder Bebayis Echad as being a Shinu Makom. Okay, so that gives you background what we've seen so far in Kufay Nechesef Aleph, and now we move on against that backdrop to Siman Kufay Neches Sif Beis Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, 4 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber Sif Beis. He's going to bring in now another variable that can affect the question of Shinu Makom. Says the Mechaber, Chaverim shayu yoshvim lechol, if you have a group of friends that are sitting together to eat, v'yatzu likras chasan or likras kala, and they hear outside there's a chasan, a kala coming by, maybe they're dancing the chasan, to his chasan or something like that. So they got up from the table and they walked out of the house. They left the house. For what purpose? To be misameach chasan v'kala. Im hinichu sham miktsasan, if they left some people by the table, not everybody went out to go misameach chasan v'kala. 10 people were sitting by the table. Some went out, some remained inside by the table. Says the Mishnah Berurah that when the Mechaber says, Im hinichu sham miktsasan, if they left some of them by the table, by the Mekaymai Harishain, by the original place of the Suda, says the Mishnah Berurah, that means even if they only left one person. So there were 10 people sitting by the table, 9 of them went out, Likras Chasan V'Kala, 1 stayed behind at the original place of the Suda. Says the Mechaber, in that case, Chayzrim Limekaymam, the other 9 could come back to the original place, the Goimrin Seudasan, and they could continue and they could complete their meal, the Einam Tzrichim Levarech Shnia, and they don't need to make a new second Bracha Rishona, nor do they have to make Berkas Hamazon on what they ate until now. Why? Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting in Gimel. Likras Chasan. Now it's very interesting. Points out the Chavetz Chaim. The case that the Mechaber chose was where they went out the front door to greet a Chasan and a Kala. Let's say they didn't go out to greet a Chasan and a Kala. Let's say they heard a ruckus outside. They saw lights and sirens, and they wanted to see what's going on outside, and they went outside to see what's going on. Does it make a difference if it's Chasan and Kala or it's that? Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'hu adin kishiyotza l'dvar harishus. It doesn't have to be that they went out likras Chasan and Kala. It could be that they went outside for anything. V'had nakat likras Chasan. Why did the Mechaber pick on the case where they went out likras Chasan v'Kala? L'Ravusa, it's to teach me a chiddush. The beloy yinichu sham adam tzarich levarich berkas hamazon mikaydim sheyetzu. The chiddush is that if they went out to greet a Chasan and a Kala, so that's a mitzvah of being misameach Chasan v'Kala, you might think that there's an exemption in such a case. Maybe if there were 10 people sitting by the table, maybe if all 10 of them went out, but they went out for a dvar mitzvah, they went out to be Mesameh Chasav Akala, maybe you would say, okay, in that case, we give you an exemption. In that case, you could come back and you could continue your Suda without Birkas Hamazon and a new Bracha Rishayna. Kamash Malon, the Mechaber is telling me, when is it true that if all of them went out, you're going to need new brachas? That's even if they went out Likras Chasav Akala, says the Mishnah Berurah. So it's the L'Revusa. The Mechaber is telling you that if everybody went out, even if they went out Likras Chasav Akala, which is a mitzvah, Tzarich Levarich Birkas Hamazon, they would have to bench Mikaydim Sheyetzu before they go out, Af Sheyetzu L'Dvar Mitzvah, even though they went out for a Dvar Mitzvah. So again, what's happening over here? The Mechaber couched his case. He told us the halacha that if you leave even one person by the table, that could anchor everybody to the table, and that makes that the meal was not terminated, and therefore they don't need to bench, and they don't need a bracha rishayna. That's the halacha the Mechaber is telling me. The Mechaber chose to tell me that halacha in the case of where they went out Likras Chasav Akala, which happens to be a mitzvah. Why? Because the truth is, this works even if you went out for a dvar rishus, even if they went out to see the lights and sirens. As long as they left somebody by the table, they're not going to have to bench, they're not going to have to make a new bracha rishayna. The chiddush is that if all of them went out, then even if they all went out for a dvar mitzvah, they're going to have to bench and they're going to have to make a new bracha rishayna. Ais kan yodalid. The Mechaber said, if they left miktsasan, if they left some of them by the table. Says the Mishnah Berurah, miktsasan means afilu echad. He brings down, because this is based on a Gemara in Psachim, if they left even one person by the table, that person is going to serve as the anchor. Ais katan tesvav, levarich shnia, they're not going to have to make a new second bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Birkas Hamaitzi. They're not going to have to make a new Hamaitzi. Av sheshinu mikayman beintayim, even though they made a bona fide shina makam. They walked out of the house. Still, they don't have to make a new bracha. Why? And here is the critical phrase of the Mishnah Berurah over here, explaining this psak of the Mechabers. Dekevan shenishar miktsasan bimkayman, because since they left some of the group, and like we saw in the Mishnah Berurah, even one person, since they left some of them in the place, loy paska seudasan b'hayitziyah. The Suda is not considered interrupted by the fact that you made a Shina Makam. So again, the understanding over here is, the reason you have to make a new Hamaitzi when you make a Shina Makam, the reason you have to bench on what you already ate when you make a Shina Makam, is because the Shina Makam constitutes an interruption of the meal. Once you walk out and make a Shina Makam, whatever you ate until now is considered one Suda, and when you walk out, you end the Suda. So you got a bench. You want to continue eating? You need a new bracha. When you come back, it's a new Suda. Says the Mechaber over here, if you left somebody by the table, that person is an anchor to anchor everybody to the table, and that person that remains by the table means that the Suda is not interrupted. The Suda is not ended. Why? Because there's still somebody sitting there. How could you say the Suda's over? He was part of the Suda, and he's still sitting there. So the Suda's not interrupted. It's not over. You don't need benching, and you don't need a bracha rishayna. Now let's go back into the Mechaber, 2 lines from the bottom near the end of the line. Vim lo hinichu sham adam. But if they went out and they didn't leave anybody by the table, kishehem yoitzim, then when they go out, tzrichim bracha lamafreya. The first thing they have to do before they go out is they need to bench. Ukishehem chayzrim, and when they come back and they want to continue eating, tzrichim bracha lakatchila. They need a new bracha rishayna to go on. Says the Mishnah Berurah's cotton tes zayin, kishehem yoitzim, when they want to go out, the kevin shelo yinichu sham adam, because since they didn't leave anybody by the table, nifseku seudasan al yedei hayitziyah. The Suda is ended by virtue of them going out. If they want to continue eating when they come back in, have a Suda Chadasha. That's a new Suda that requires a new Bracha Rishayna. When they come back, they need a new bracha rishona. Says the Chofetz Chaim, be'emes kvar koseh zeh b'sif aleph. Really, already at this point in Sif Beis, the Mechaber is not telling me a chiddush. The Mechaber already told me in Sif Aleph that if you make a bona fide shinui makom, then you need to bench on what you ate until now, and you need to make a new bracha rishona on what you're going to eat mikan u'laba. So all the Mechaber is telling me in Sif Beis is you should know that leaving somebody by the table could make it not a shinui makom. So what the Mechaber really could have said was, Bamed varim amurim, when did we say this halacha? When you didn't leave anybody by the table. But if you left somebody by the table, then everybody else going out doesn't make a shinui makom. Okay? If it doesn't make a shinui makom, then what's the halacha? Then you don't need benching and you don't need a new bracha rishona. So the Mechaber seems to be extra wordy over here. We know that already. Says the Chofetz Chaim, and he's cutting Yadayin. Really, we know this already from Sif Aleph. The Mechaber is being repetitious, and he's repeating himself. Or it could be that he's just repeating himself for the chiddush of even though they went out likras chassav v'kala, even though they went out for a mitzvah, still if they didn't leave anybody by the table, it's going to require benching and a new bracha rishona. Okay. Now we're on the last line of Pei Aleph Amud Aleph. Last few words on the daf, beginning with the word v'chein. Now, before we read this next sentence, we just have to understand one thing, and that is, if you remember, in the beautiful Hakdama of the Chofetz Chaim to this siman, we spoke about the machlokes Rav Sheshes and Rav Chisda. We spoke about a machlokes in the Gemara in Pesachim. When does this din of shinui makom apply? Does this din of shinui makom apply no matter what kind of food you ate, or is it limited to certain foods? And what we saw is, Rav Sheshes is very machmer. Rav Sheshes holds that the shaila of shinui makom pertains to all kind of foods, even a seuda ala pas, which is what the Mechaber has been talking about until now. Even though by a seuda ala pas there is a halachic requirement that is going to force you to return to your original place. So, if you're in the middle of your Friday night Shabbos Suda, right? So you washed the Til Sidayim, you made a Moitzi ala pas. You got up, you walked out the front door, you went to your friend's house. The Mechaber is telling me, the Mechaber is paskening, that once you walked out the front door, you ended your Suda. Since you ended your Suda, you're going to have to bench on whatever you ate until now, and if you want to continue eating, you need a new bracha rishona. Now, what's interesting about that is, how could you say that you ended your Suda? Halacha is going to force you to come back to your dining room table, because you need to bench. And benching has to take place where you ate. So there is a halacha that is going to force you to come back to the table. So there would seem to be a very strong svara, a very strong logic to say, no, if you washed it, you made a moitzi, don't tell me that when I got up and I walked out, I ended my Suda. You know I have to come back. The halacha is going to require me to come back. Rav Sheshes says, no, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Even though it's true you have to come back, but what do you have to come back for? You have to come back for benching. That's what you have to come back for. Benching is once the Suda is over. So Rav Sheshes says, you walked out, you ended the Suda. That's Shitas Rav Sheshes. The Rambam paskins like Rav Sheshes, and therefore the Mechaber paskins like the Rambam, and that's what we've seen until now, because the Mechaber is talking about a Suda where you made a moitzi ala pas, and he says that shinui makom is effective. Rav Chisda is much more makel. Rav Chisda says that this doesn't apply to all foods. It doesn't apply to hamoitzi. Why? Because of what we said. By hamoitzi, you got to come back. It doesn't apply to dvarim shetzrichim bracha b'mekaimam, which l'chayra would be ala michya also. It's anything that requires you halachically to come back for the bracha achrona is not affected by shinui makom. That sheet is Rav Chisda. The Ramah we're going to see is going to paskin like Rav Chisda. But the point I want to make is that until now, we haven't seen the Mechaber talk about anything else other than Pas. Now, says the Mechaber, V'chein, similarly, Im hayu mesubin, if a bunch of people were sitting around together, and now we turn to Pei Aleph on the base, Im hayu mesubin lishtois, if people were sitting together to drink coffee, that's a shahakal. Oy lechel peris, that's a boy priya eitz. So, what does the Mechaber say? V'chein, and similarly, Im hayu mesubin lishtois lechel peris, the same halacha applies. Shekala mishana mekaymai, because whenever you make a shina makam, I don't care what kind of food you eat, whenever you make a shina makam, hare pasak achilasai, you ended your meal, you ended your eating. Ulafikach, and therefore, mivarach lemafrei al mashachal, you got to make a bracha achrayna where you ate until now. V'chayzer mavar shenis al mashu tzarich lechoil, and you need to make a new bracha rishayna, so you need to make a new shahakal on the rest of your coffee. You need to make a new bar priyates on your apple, because you broke your suda in half. But again, just like the Mechaber said by Pas, if you go from one end of the room to the other end of the room, which the Mishnah Berurah is going to say means in one room, if you went from one end of the room to the other end of the room, you do not have to make a new bracha, says the Mishnah Berurah. So the first question that the Mishnah Berurah tackles over here is this word v'chein. Wants to know what exactly does the Mechaber mean v'chein im hayu mesubin lishtais eilechel peres. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut Yud Ches, the bottom of Pei Aleph from an Aleph in the Mishnah Berurah. V'chein im hayu ashmi'inan. What the Mechaber is coming to teach us is tegam bozeh mahani hiniach miktsas chaverim k'moi b'seudas pas. Let's remember, the Mechaber wrote this halacha of shahakal and peris at a very funny place in the Mechaber. Really, I would have thought that the place for this to be would have been in Sif Aleph. This should have been a continuation of Sif Aleph. In Sif Aleph, the Mechaber introduced to me the concept of Shina Malkum. Now, he introduced it to me in the context of a Suda ala Pas. But really, what if the Mechaber then wanted to discuss a Shahakal or Peris, what the Mechaber could have done was, he could have said, if you interrupt a Suda ala Pas with a Shina Malkum, you need benching and you need a Bracha Rishona. V'chein, im hayu misubin lishtais alechel Peris. It applies to Shahakal and it applies to Bar Priya's foods as well. But that's not where the Mechaber put it. The Mechaber put it in Sif Beis after telling me the halacha of if you went out to Likras Chassid V'Kala. The Mechaber said, by a Suda ala Pas, if you went out Likras Chassid V'Kala, but you left somebody by the table, leaving somebody by the table makes that you didn't interrupt the Suda, and you don't need a Bracha Achrayna, and you don't need a new Bracha Rishayna. Then he says, V'chein im hayu misubin lishtais alechel peris. Why put it over there? Why not put it in Sif Aleph? Let's say the Mechaber would have put it in Sif Aleph. So if the Mechaber would have put it in Sif Aleph, if we go back to the beginning of Sif Aleph and kind of go in sequence and see how the Mechaber would have given us these halachas, it would come out that what the Mechaber would have done is like this. The Mechaber would have told us, if you're in the middle of a Suda ala Pas and you make a Shina Makayim, you should know that that is problematic. Then the Mechaber would tell us, also, if you make a Shina Makayim when you're drinking coffee or you're eating peiros, that's also a problem. Then in Sif Beis, the Mechaber would tell me, how about if in the middle of a Suda, whether it's a Suda ala Pas or it's just people sitting around and drinking coffee or eating peiros, what if you go out Likras Chassid V'Kala? Well, if you go out Likras Chassid V'Kala, that leaves an anchor. It means that you didn't interrupt the meal, and you don't need a Bracha Achrayna and a new Bracha Rishayna. That's what we're suggesting the Mechaber could have done. But the truth is that would also be a little bit problematic. Because let's say the Mechaber did that. If the Mechaber did that, then what the Mechaber would be telling me is, Shine Makayim by a Suda La Pas is a problem. Shine Makayim by coffee and peiros is also a problem. Well, if Shine Makayim is a problem by Pas, where halacha forces you to come back to the table, then of course Shine Makayim is a problem by coffee and peiros. It's much easier to have for Shine Makayim to be a problem by coffee and peiros. So really, that would also seem to be a little bit backwards. With Mishnah Berurah Eis Cotton Yud Ches, the Mishnah Berurah answers all of these questions. The Mishnah Berurah says like this: the Mechaber said, "V'chein imahayu misubin lishtais oilechol peiros," and similarly, if you were sitting down to drink coffee or to eat peiros, Shine Makayim is a problem. Says the Mishnah Berurah Eis Cotton Yud Ches. You know what v'chein means? V'chein is going back on the halacha of the beginning of Sif Beis. It's not going back on the halacha of Sif Aleph. The Mechaber is not saying, just like Shine Makayim is a problem by Pas, v'chein, Shine Makayim is also a problem by coffee and apples. That wouldn't make any sense. That's not really a v'chein. It's a bigger chiddush by hamaitzi than it is by coffee and apples. The v'chein is not going back on Sif Aleph, says the Mishnah Berurah. The v'chein is going back on the beginning of Sif Beis. The halacha of the beginning of Sif Beis was, if you leave somebody by the table when you go out, that person who remains by the table makes that you didn't interrupt your Suda. On that, says the Mechaber, v'chein im hayu mesubin lishtais elechel peiros. That halacha of Sif Beis applies not only by a Suda ala Pas, where it's harder to make a Shine Makayim, because halacha makes you come back. It even applies if you're sitting around and drinking coffee or eating peiros, where it's easier to make a Shine Makayim. So even in the case where it's easier to make a Shine Makayim, by a shahakal or by a Berurah eitz, leaving somebody by the table will help. Now we understand the signain hadvarim. Now we understand the sequence of halachas in the Mechaber. The first halacha in the Mechaber was you should know there's a concept of Shine Makayim. And you should know that I paskin like the Rambam, who paskins like Reb Sheshes, that Shine Makayim even applies to Seuda ala Pas, where halacha is going to make you come back to the table for Birkas Hamazon. Then says the Mechaber in Sif Beis, now I'm going to tell you a chiddush. The chiddush that I'm going to tell you is, leaving somebody by the table could save you from Shine Makayim. Because leaving somebody by the table makes that you didn't interrupt the Suda. So now you're saved from Shine Makayim. Now I'm going to tell you another chiddush. V'chein imahayu misubin lishtais elechel peiros. This chiddush that I'm telling you in Sif Beis, that leaving somebody by the table could save you from Shine Makayim, leaving somebody by the table is so powerful that it could even save you from Shine Makayim by a shahakal and a Berurah eitz, where there's nothing making you come back to the table at all, so Shine Makayim is much more dangerous. Still, leaving somebody by the table could save you from Shine Makayim. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah inside. It's cut Yud Ches, the bottom of Pe'alef of an Aleph. V'chein im hayu ashmi'inan. What the Mishnah Berurah is teaching me with this, what the Mechaber is teaching me with this is, says the Chavetz Chaim, the gam bazeh mahani hiniach miktsas chaverim. That even over here, leaving even one person by the table will help you. It'll save you from Shine Makayim k'moi besudas hapas, the same way it does by a suda ala pas. Even though over there it's much harder to make a Shine Makayim. So maybe I would think leaving somebody by the table by a Suda ala Pas, that saves you from Shine Makayim. But when people were sitting around the table and eating peiros, leaving somebody by the table is going to save you from Shine Makayim, says the Mechaber, Yes, it will. Okay, now we go to Mishnah Berurah's cutting your test, where the Mechaber again, seemingly very repetitiously, the Mechaber explains the whole concept of Shina Makayim, which is, in the words of the Mechaber on the top line of Pei Aleph Amud Beis, Shekala Meshana Mekayimei Rei Pasuk Achilosai. Whenever you make a Shina Makayim, you're interrupting your eating. You're finishing your first Suda. Ulefikach, and therefore, Mavarach L'Mafrei Al Masha'achal, you need to make a bracha achrona what you ate until now. V'chayzer Mavar Shenis Amashu Tzarech Lechayil, and you gotta make a new bracha rishona, whatever you want to continue eating. Mishnah Berurah is cutting your test. Pasuk Achilasai, you ended your Suda, and points out the Chavetz Chaim, and this is going to come back into play later on. He points out making a Shina Makayim interrupts your Suda. V'gara mehesach hadas. It's even worse than Hesach Hadas. Because by Hesach Hadas, if you're Mesiach Das, it makes you make a new bracha Rishona. But Hesach Hadas doesn't make you bench. If somehow you made a Hamoitzi, and then you had a big interruption, and you were Mesiach Das from the Suda, it could be that you need to make a new Hamoitzi if you want to continue eating. But nobody says that because of a Hesach Hadas, you have to bench on what you ate until now. Hesach Hadas does not end the Suda. It terminates the effectiveness of the bracha Rishona because you were Mesiach Das from when you made the bracha Rishona until now when you're eating. So you need a new bracha Rishona. But nobody says that Hesach Hadas requires you to bench. So points out the Chavetz Chaim that the Shina Makayim is worse than Hesach Hadas. The Garam Hesach Hadas, according to the Mechaber, Shein mevarchet rak bracha lechatchila, because by Hesach Hadas you just have to make a new bracha rishona kishachayzalecha when you want to continue eating. Dezen nechshav kisuda acheres legamri. The reason it's worse is because by Shina Makayim you're mamish breaking the suda into two. The original suda is over, and now when you continue eating, it's a new suda. Eis katan chaf ulefikach mevarich hainu kishalei birch bracha achrei dekaydim yitziyasai. If you did the wrong thing, Lechatchila, you should have benched before you walked out the door. But if you didn't do that, and you walked out the door without benching, and now you come back, you got to bench now. Mavarach atak kishachazar, bench now when you come back. And you're also going to have to make a new bracha. You're going to have to make a bracha achrona what you ate until now. Ubazeh, and in this case of the Mechaber, where we're talking about shahakal or peris, right? Over here on the top of Pei Aleph Amud Beis, we're going on the v'chein mesubed lishtay selekal peros. So now we're talking about the case of coffee or fruit. Ubazeh, by coffee and fruit, ein tzarich lachzor l'mekaymai dafka. By a suda ala pas, if you got up from the table and you walked out without benching, you're going to have to come back to the table to bench. By coffee or by apples, by a shahakal or by a Berurah, if you didn't make a bracha achrona and you walked out the door, you don't have to come back to make the bracha achrona, because shahakal, Berurah, they don't require bracha b'mkaymai. Eliyachal levarach afilu b'makam hasheni. You can make the bracha achrona even in the next house. Because it's only by bread, by brikas hamazon, that everybody agrees that you must bench where you ate. So again, just to be clear on what the Mishnah Berurah is saying over here, we're dealing with two different cases. One case is the Friday night Suda, where you washed the Tilas Yadayim, you made a moitzi, you kaveh Suda la pas, you got up in the middle of the meal, you want to go next door to your neighbor, and you want to fabreng with your neighbor a little bit. Really, lechatchila, before you walk out the door, you have to bench. You want to eat in your neighbor's house, you need to make new brachas. You want to come back and continue eating in your own house, you're going to need new brachas. Bidi Eved, if you didn't bench before you walked out, so you'll go to your neighbor, and then eventually you're going to have to come back from your neighbor to your house, and you're going to have to bench in your house. The other case is shahakal or peris. If you made a shahakal on a coffee, and now you want to go walk out, you got to make a bar nefashos. If you didn't make the bar nefashos before you walked out, and you went to your neighbor, you don't have to come back to make the bar nefashos. You can make the bar nefashos by your neighbor. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is saying over here in Eis Katan Chaf Aleph. Okay, now continues the Mechaber, and the Mechaber says, second line down near the end of the line, Again, he says in the context now of Shahakal and Paris, if you go from one end of the room to the other end of the room, says the Mishnah. What does the Mechaber mean when he says over here, Babayis Echad? Pirish Becheder Echad. Over here, Babayis is a misnomer. He doesn't mean if you went from one end of the house to the other end of the house, that would be Mecheder Lecheder. Mecheder Lecheder, the Mechaber for sure holds, is a Shidim Mokum. So when the Mechaber says over here, Hameshana Mekaima Mipina Lepina Babayis Echad, because it's not a Shinim Makom, he means from one end of the room to the other end of the room. Pirish Becheder Echad, Vayin Meshkesavda Bebir Allah Dibra Maskal Babayis. Ais Kadachaf Gimel Einay Tzarech. He doesn't have to make a new bracha, because one end of the room to the other end of the room does not constitute a Shinim Makom. V'av Shinim Makom Legamri. Even if you mamish left your original place and went to another place, lechol b'zavas hacheres. You were eating on one side of the room, and now your chaver came in, and he wants to shmooze with you, and there's no room where you were eating for another person to sit down next to you, so you get up and you move your place setting and everything else to the other end of the room. Ein tzark lachzul levarach, d'zeh einay nechsher shina makom. And this is true even if you can't see the original place, because there's furniture in the way. Continues the Mechaber, third line down, middle of the line, by the Ois Chav Daled for the Mishnah Berurah. Achal b'mizracha shel te'enazu. Let's say you're sitting outside in a park. We're talking now, like we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah, you're not sitting in a place that's surrounded by mechitzos. You're sitting outside in the middle of the park somewhere, and you're eating under a fig tree. So you're leaning with your back on the fig tree. Says the Mechaber, Achal b'mizracha shel te'enazu. You're eating a tuna fish sandwich, and you started eating on the eastern side of the fig tree, of the fig tree. Uba lechol b'marava. And now, for some reason, maybe the sun started shining on you. You decided that you want to leave this side of the tree, the east side of the tree, and you want to go around the tree, and you want to eat on the west side of the tree. And we're talking about a significant tree. We're talking about a big, wide tree. So when you were sitting on the east side of the tree, you couldn't see the west side of the tree, because it's a big tree. The tree is blocking you. When you get up and you go around the tree and you sit on the other side, you're sitting in a place where you could not see your original place. Says the Mechaber, says the Mishnah Berurah, doesn't matter what you ate. It doesn't matter if you're eating a tuna fish sandwich, so you washed a la pas, or you're eating an apple. You made a bar priates, you sat down on the east side of the tree, and now you get up and you go to the west side of the tree. Or maybe you're eating figs from the fig tree itself. So you went from the east side to the west side, said the Mechaber tzarich levarich. Why? Since the fig tree is blocking from your first place to your second place, when you sit on the west side of the tree, you can't see the east side of the tree. But we have to be talking about a case where you're sitting is not an area that's walled in by mechitzos. Because if you're sitting in an area that has walls around it, so it's fenced in, even though you got up from one side of the tree, you went to the other side of the tree, and you can't see from one to the other, you would not need a new bracha rishayna. And you wouldn't need a bracha achrayna what you ate until now. Why? Because in that case, the chashav hakol makam echad. That would be like going from one end of the room to the other end of the room. We said that when you're in a house, if you go from one end of the room to the other end of the room, it's not considered a shirim makom. Why? And we said, the Mishnah Berurah said that's true, even if you can't see your original place from your second place. It's still not considered a shirim makom. Why? Because it's in one room. So how come over here, if I go from one side of the tree to the other side of the tree, it is a shirim makom? The answer is because by the tree, we're talking about you're not walled in. So there's nothing making it like you're in one area. You're not in one unified area when you go from one side of the tree to the other side of the tree. You might be very close. You might be only 3 feet away from where you started, but you can't see the second place from the first place. You can't see the first place from the second place, and you're not walled in, so it's shot that I'm in one demarcated area. You're not. That's the difference between this and one end of the room or the other. In Sif Gimel, we're going to talk about an interesting case. What if you're in a park and there's an apple tree and then a date tree and then a fig tree, and you're going from tree to tree eating the fruits of the different trees? We'll talk about that in Sif Gimel. The Berurah brings down over here from a Ravid that there are those that say that in this case das would help. If when you made the bracha rishayna on the east side of the tree, you had das that I'm going to move all around, that das would help, and you wouldn't need a new bracha when you go around the tree. Okay, we're going to stop over here because this ends the Shitas HaMachaber, and then we're going to go into the Shitas HaRamah, so we're going to say that for the next year. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The Source of Liman HaTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua's refuahs parnasos sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Gula Shleima with the Bias Kal Tzedek b'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.